Hello guys, it's Uchales here again and welcome to this course where we'll be looking at application of shadows. In the previous course, I haven't been able to talk about the importance of light and shadow in our designs and how they help our designs to feel real and have some perspective. In this course, we'll be looking at how we apply these shadows in objects in Photoshop. To apply shadows to your design or different objects in your design, we have three methods, and I'll be showing you those three methods. It's important I show you these three methods now so that when we begin to apply them in our designs from subsequent courses, you won't be surprised, or it will be easier for you to catch up and understand why we do what we do. So first of all, let's bring in an image to Photoshop. So right here, the image of this guy, we drag and drop him inside our artboard. So now we have the image of this young man here. We click enter. So we want to cut this young man out of this background. Now in our previous videos, I've shown you several ways we cut images out of their backgrounds. So right here, I'll be using a very quick method that I have never shown you before. In this method, we'll be using the artificial intelligence of this software to cut out this image from the background. So the tool instantly identifies this young man and removes him from the background without us selecting anything or without us doing anything. So the AI tool, which stands for artificial intelligence tool, does the selection by itself automatically. So this is the first time we are using this tool. Before now, I've shown you how to use the pen tool to select. I've shown you how to use the quick selection tool or the magic wand tool in the previous videos. So this is the first time we are using this tool. So once you have your image selected, you quickly go to the select option at the top menu here. Once you click on it, you scroll down to subject. So that tool instantly identifies the subject in our image and selects it. And once our subject is selected, we'll just go straight to select again and hit select and mask. Once you click on select and mask, we have our subject selected, and we can use the refine edge tool to, let's zoom in a little bit so we can see the hair clearly. Then we can now use the refine edge tool to remove those backgrounds from the hair area, and we can now scroll down to this part and click output to layer mask, and now click OK. So let's add a background. Then we'll go to our adjustment layer and fill the background with a solid color. So click on this solid color, and now we will have a purple background. Or should I go for green? Yes, let me go for this shade of green. Let me click OK. So let's zoom out. So right now we have our selection of this guy quickly done by Photoshop's artificial intelligence tool. So this method is pretty fast and awesome. Especially it works best when your background, the background of the image you want to use, is plain. Like in this case, the background of the image you want to use is plain. We don't have anyone on the background. We just only have the guy and a plain background. So it's easier for the tool to select the young man. But for a complex background, you have to use the pen tool, as we have always done in the previous videos. So let's go back to our selection. So we have this guy here, and we want to add shadows to this guy. So what we have to do is, the first method we use to add shadow is to use the brush tool and paint the shadow behind this man. So all we have to do is to come over to this area. We have to click on any of the layers. We have to create a new layer. Come and click on this icon at the bottom here, which is to create a new layer. Once you click on the icon, we see layer 1. This is a new layer, and on this new layer you make sure that you bring it below the layer of the man's image. So now we have this new layer behind the layer containing the image. This is because the shadow has to be behind the man and not on top of the man. So we have to make the layer below the image layer, so that when we apply paint the shadow, it will be behind the man. Then I have selected my brush tool. Let me select this. Since our shadow has to be black, let me come in and choose the color of our shadow. So I come over to this place, the foreground color, I double click, and instantly the color picker tool appears, and I go and choose any shade of brown or black that I'm comfortable with, and I click OK. So looking at this man's image, before you start applying the shadow, first of all, try to identify where the light source is coming from. And the way you have to identify this light source is by looking at the image of the young man. Looking at this image, you instantly see the highlight from the light source. The light source is coming from the right here. So you see the highlight on his face, you see the highlight on this part of the shirt, and you can see that this part of the shirt is a little bit darker than this part. So the light is at the front of this man. By right side, the light source is coming somewhere from the right here and is shining on his face, because the highlight on his body is telling us so. So you have to allow the highlight on the body guide you to where you place the shadow. So because the highlight is on this part, that means the shadow has to be here at the back of the man by the left. Since the light is on the right, the shadow has to be by the left. So let's begin to apply our shadow. You have to set your opacity of your brush or the flow of your brush to the setting that you're comfortable with. But I'm setting my flow to 20% and my opacity to 100. So I'm beginning to paint. So let me add the shadow of the head. Let me also add another shadow. So you see how I've been able to gradually add some shadow for this young man. So this place is too intense. Let me delete that part a bit. Let me go to the eraser tool and reduce the size. It's too big. The opacity is still at 100 and the flow is still at 20. So I'll still tap on this area to reduce the shadow there a little bit because it's too dark there. So you can see I have been able to adjust that area. So now the image is looking better. So if we had not taken this layer behind the image layer, if it had been at the top, you see that the shadow we are painting will be on top of this man's image, and it will not be cool. So it has to be below at all times. Then we can now name the layer shadow or man's shadow. Man's shadow. So click enter after typing, and now it has been changed to man's shadow. So we now have the shadow of this man right behind the man. So this is the first method. This is method number 1. So is by using brush tool. We have another method. All right. So let me close the visibility of this man's shadow. We have another method, which is by going to the layer style panel. The way you have access to the layer style panel is by double clicking on the image layer. Don't double click on the area that has the name. Just move outside the name and double click on the empty space outside the name. And once you do that, double click and a window will pop up. So this window is the layer style panel. And if you look at the several options here, you see drop shadow. So you can click on the drop shadow, and instantly, once you click on it, you can see the settings of the shadow. The settings of on the settings of the shadow here, you can choose the color for the shadow. You can choose the color to be red if you want. Let me choose the color to be a darker shade of this background. So a dark green instead of black that we used before. Let me use a dark green. So I click OK. Then you can choose the opacity of the shadow, right? Let me keep the opacity at 100% so we can be seeing what we are doing. Then you can choose the angle of the shadow. Let's shift this a little bit so we can understand what we mean by angle. Now we have said that our light source is coming from the right, so our shadow has to be by the left. So we use this to adjust where our shadow falls in. So if it's here, you see that the shadow is by the right, and it's not cool because the shadow cannot be by the right because our light source is on the right. So the shadow has to be by the left, which is behind the man by the left. So we have to adjust the angle until it fits or it suits the angle or direction that we want. So this is better. Then we use this to adjust the the distance of the shadow, right? So we can see these various settings. We can keep adjusting the distance. Then also we can, if the shadow wanted to spread more than it is, we can come over here and move this to spread it even more. We can increase the size of the spread to blur it further. All right. So you keep adjusting these sliders until you are okay with what you are seeing, because as you keep adjusting them, Photoshop allows you to see the real time application of your adjustments and your settings. So this size is too much. Let's reduce it a bit. The spread is too much as well. Let's reduce that too. Then the distance. Okay, let's leave it here. And the opacity, let's drop that a bit. So it has to be mild. Let it not be too obvious or too strong like this. Shadows, this shadow is too sharp or too strong. So we have to reduce the opacity. So it to be subtle or mild. So this is okay. Then we have to drag this out. So we can now click OK. Okay, before we do that, we can choose to add noise to the shadow. If you look at the shadow now, it's let me increase the opacity so you see what I'm trying to show you. If you look at the shadow now, shadow has what we call noise. All right. So we can choose to add that effect if we want to, but then I don't want to, so I'm taking it down. Then can lower down the opacity to 25, or should make it 35 is okay, to 35. So if you want to keep adding more shadows, you can keep clicking on this plus icon here. Then the shadow keeps duplicating. So that's one of the amazing things about this effect. You can keep stacking them on top of each other if you want to. Let me delete them. This is highlighted. I come and click this delete icon here and it gets deleted. So you can keep stacking the effects on top of each other, and now come here. When you're done, you can come here and click OK. So we have our shadow here behind this young man, and we can come here. You can see the shadows here. You can see them right below the layer of the image. So we can actually shut off that drop shadow if we want to. So in this case, let's shut it off, or we can go back to the layer panel, can double click there and go back to the layer style panel and uncheck the drop shadow and click OK. So I have removed I can still bring it back if I want to, but then So this is the second way we add shadow to subjects. Then the third method we use to add shadows to subject is by, let me show you the third method, is by actually duplicating this image and use this image as its own shadow. So let's switch this. Let me switch off the effect so I can hide that shadow that we just applied. Let me duplicate this image. So I just duplicate it. To duplicate this image, all I have to do is to double click on this layer, drag it down to this create new layer icon. Once I drag it down there and release my hand, it instantly duplicates itself. So watch me do it. I double click on this layer and I drag it down. I go over to the create new layer icon and I release my hand. And once I do that, you see we now have two layers. I have duplicated that image. I carried that image here and added it in the new layer. So I just duplicated that image. So we are trying to create shadows, right? So I need to create one image and use it as a shadow. So let me highlight on this one and move it out. So I'm using my left arrow key on the keyboard to shift the other image below. So you see we have the duplicate here. You couldn't see them earlier because they were just on top of each other. So let me take it back. So we still have the images, but one is right behind the other. So this is what we're going to do. This other one that is behind, this one that is below the top one, then I have to use the left arrow key on the keyboard to bring it out in the place of the place we want to use the shadow. Then I just have to adjust it a little bit to come down a little bit. So now we have our shadow, the image we want to use for the shadow. But the image is supposed to be black, right? Or our shadow is supposed to be a darker color, or let's say black. So I need to turn this image to black. So how do I do it? I'll still go back to that layer style panel. I have to double click on this part of the layer panel, or the part of the image layer. Then I go down to color overlay. So what this means is once you click on color overlay, watch what is going to happen here. I've clicked on it. Let me click on the color overlay itself to bring out the settings here. So by choosing color overlay, you have to cover this image with black. So let me go back to it. Or let me choose a darker shade of the green. So let me click OK. If you notice something, you are not seeing that effect on this young man because what? If you remember, before we duplicated these images, I switched off the visibility of the effect on the layer before duplicating it. So whatever effect I apply will not show because I switched off the visibility. So see the effect here. So before it, if I click right there where we're supposed to have the visibility effect icon, if I just click on it, you see instantly that layer, all the effects on that layer have kicked in. I don't want to show the drop, I don't want us to see the drop shadow, so I'm going to switch off the visibility of the drop shadow. So I'm just having the image of this young man filled up with color. So now we have the duplicate image filled with a color. We have to blur out this duplicate to make it look like a shadow, because most of the time shadows don't have sharp edges like this. Shadows are usually blurry. So you have to make it blurry so it can look like a shadow. Then to make it blurry, you have to go to the blur tool, which is the tool we use to apply the blur effect or the blur filter in Photoshop. So to make that happen, first of all, if you look at the layer panel here, you see that the image layer is selected. You make sure that the layer mask icon or thumbnail, the layer mask thumbnail is highlighted instead and not the image layer. So you highlight the layer mask thumbnail. All right, then go over to this filter menu up here. You click on filter, then scroll down to blur. Under blur, you see different types of the blur tools, different tools under the blur that you can use to cause different blur effects. Then you go over to Gaussian blur. When you click on Gaussian blur, instantly you can preview the changes that Gaussian blur is having on that image. You can move your sliders anyhow you like to adjust the rate of the blur or the rate of the effect on our image. So you keep applying it, and once you are satisfied, let's say 48.4 is okay by me, I click OK. And once I click OK, the shadow is too strong. I can still come over to, once the layer mask thumbnail is still highlighted, I'll come over to opacity and drop down the opacity a little bit. Okay, and you see, I know you might want to ask, when do you use either of each of these methods? Yeah, each of these methods can be used depending on what you want to achieve. So they all have their applications and uses. In the future courses, as we begin to make some designs, we'll be applying different methods of this shadow application so that you know when to use either of them. So, and that's that for this course. These are the 3 different ways we apply shadows in Photoshop. All right, so as you go on in the course and begin to create different designs, you get to learn different places or different applications of each of these methods. So that's that for this course. See you in the next one.